In 224 BC, King Zheng of Qin committed an act of supreme desperation. He did not just mobilize an army. He emptied his entire kingdom of men. 600,000 soldiers, fathers, sons, and farmers were stripped from their fields and handed over to a 60-year-old general who had begged to retire. This was not merely a military campaign. It was a national gamble, where the wager was survival itself. If this army failed, the Qin state would be defenseless, open to annihilation by the only power left on Earth capable of defying them. Welcome back to the History Atlas. Today, we witness the violent climax of the Warring States period. This is the story of the conquest of Chu, the ultimate duel between the unstoppable machinery of the Qin Empire and the defiant, mystical spirit of the South, led by two generals who represented the very souls of their nations, Wang Jian and Xiang Yan. By 224 BC, the map of the Warring States was stained with the blood of fallen kingdoms. Han, Zhao, and Wei had crumbled under the relentless pressure of the Qin war machine. However, looking south, King Zheng faced a problem that standard military doctrine could not easily solve. The state of Chu was not merely another target. It was a different world entirely. Spanning the vast, humid basins of the Yangtze and Huai rivers, Chu possessed a territory roughly equal to all the northern states combined. The geography itself was a primary weapon. The Qin military machine had been perfected on the arid, open plains of the north. Disciplined formations of heavy infantry and thundering war chariots that required solid ground to crush their enemies. Chu, by contrast, was a nightmare of treacherous marshes, dense primeval forests, and a labyrinth of waterways. In this terrain, the heavy chariots of the north sank into the mud, and the cavalry lost its shock value. To invade Chu was not just to fight an army. It was to fight the earth itself. Culturally, the two rivals were alien to one another. Qin was a legalist monolith, a rigid state where every man was a cog in the ruler's design, governed by harsh, unyielding laws. Chu was a land of ancient aristocracy, shamanistic mysticism, and fierce regional pride. It was a chaotic, sprawling giant, often paralyzed by the corruption and infighting of its powerful noble clans. For decades, strategists in Xianyang had dismissed Chu as a rotting carcass. Huge but lethargic, governed by incompetent kings. But this dismissal was a fatal error. Beneath the corruption lay immense resources and a population that, unlike the weary conscripts of other states, possessed a fiery, almost spiritual attachment to their land. The conquest of the North had been a series of calculated annexations. The conquest of the South would be a collision of civilizations, requiring a scale of warfare never before seen in human history. In the Great Hall of Xianyang, the air was thick with the scent of incense and ambition. King Zheng, the man who would become the first emperor, was impatient. The unification of the world was within his grasp, and only Chu stood in his way. He turned to his generals with a simple question, asking how many troops were needed to crush the South. Stepping forward was Li Xin, a rising star of the Qin military. Young, aggressive, and flush with recent victories, Li Xin represented the new breed of Qin warfare. fast, decisive, and fearless. He looked the king in the eye and declared that he could shatter the state of Chu with only 200,000 men. It was a bold claim, promising a swift and inexpensive victory, music to the ears of a ruler eager to finish his wars. Then the king turned to Wang Jian. The old general was a relic of a harder era, a man who had survived decades of slaughter through caution, not bravado. Wang Jian remained silent for a moment before delivering his verdict, stating that without 600,000 men, it could not be done. The court fell silent. 600,000 was not an army. It was the entire male population of the state. It was a logistical nightmare that would drain the treasury dry. King Zheng laughed, mocking the veteran's caution. The king remarked that General Wang was old and his courage had left him. He dismissed the old master's warning as the timidity of a senile man. The command was given to Li Xin. Humiliated but resolute in his assessment, Wang Jian stripped off his armor, claimed illness, and retreated to his estates in Pinyang, waiting for the disaster he knew was coming. In 225 BC, Li Xin marched south with his 200,000 troops, splitting his forces to pincer the Chu defenders. At first, history seemed to vindicate his arrogance. Li Xin smashed through the Chu vanguards at Pingyu, while his vice-general Meng Tian crushed resistance at Qingqiu. The Qin armies swept deep into enemy territory, seemingly unstoppable. To the young general, the conquest appeared to be a simple mop-up operation. But they were walking into the jaws of a beast. Waiting in the shadows was Xiang Yan, the supreme commander of Chu and a tactician of terrifying patience. He understood that Li Xin's aggression was his greatest weakness. Instead of engaging the Qin forces in a decisive head-on collision, Xiang Yan allowed them to overextend, stretching their supply lines across the hostile, marshy terrain. Then, the trap snapped shut from behind. In a shocking political twist, Lord Changping, a Chu prince who had served as a high-ranking official in Qin, revolted in the rear city of Ying, cutting off Li Xin's retreat. Panic rippled through the Qin ranks. Realizing he was encircled, Li Xin ordered a desperate withdrawal. This was the moment Xiang Yan had been waiting for. The Chu army did not just attack. They hunted. Abandoning standard formation, Xiang Yan's forces shadowed the retreating Qin columns, refusing to rest. For 3 days and 3 nights, without pausing to eat or sleep, the Chu soldiers pursued the invaders. They struck relentlessly at the exhausted, demoralized Qin rearguard. The retreat turned into a massacre. Li Xin's army was shattered. 7 of his top commandants were slaughtered, and the remnants of the 200,000 elite troops fled back north in disgrace. It was the single greatest military disaster of King Zheng's life. The news of the disaster struck Xianyang like a thunderbolt. For the first time, the invincible aura of the Qin state had been shattered. King Zheng, a ruler known for his merciless temper, did not execute Li Xin. Instead, he did something far more shocking. He swallowed his pride. The king traveled personally to the retirement estate of Wang Jian in Pinyang. Standing before the old general he had mocked just months before, the future emperor bowed and uttered words that few absolute monarchs ever speak. admitting he was foolish not to listen to his counsel. Wang Jian did not gloat. He simply repeated his condition, unyielding as stone. If the king wished to defeat Chu, it must be 600,000 men, not one less. This time, the king agreed. He emptied the garrisons, stripping the northern borders and the capital itself to scrape together the largest army the world had ever seen. He placed the fate of his entire dynasty into the hands of one man. But as the colossal army began its march south, Wang Jian began to behave strangely. Before departing, and repeatedly during the march, he sent messengers back to the king with petty, nagging requests. He asked for the best rice paddies, large estates, fertile gardens, and ponds for his children and grandchildren. His subordinates were baffled. They asked him why, at a moment of such national gravity, he was obsessing over personal wealth. Wang Jian looked at them and revealed the terrifying truth of serving a tyrant. He explained that the king was suspicious and trusted no one. That day, he had been given command of 600,000 soldiers, the entire strength of the state. If he appeared noble and selfless, the king would suspect he had ambition to seize the throne. He had to show him that he was nothing but a greedy old man who cared only for property and his family's comfort. Only then would the king feel safe enough to let him fight. This was the paradox of the Qin court. To win the war, Wang Jian first had to wage a psychological campaign against his own ruler, trading his reputation for his life. Upon reaching the Chu border, Wang Jian did the exact opposite of what the world expected. He did not unleash his 600,000 soldiers in a wave of destruction. Instead, he ordered them to put down their spears and pick up shovels. The Qin army dug in, constructing a massive line of fortified ramparts and deep trenches. Then, the old general issued a command that baffled both his officers and his enemies. No one was to engage the enemy, and any officer who sought battle would be beheaded. On the other side of the lines, Xiang Yan, fresh from his victory over Li Xin, was eager for another slaughter. He paraded his troops daily before the Qin walls, shouting insults, challenging the invaders to come out and fight like men. He tried every psychological trick to provoke a response, hoping to draw the Qin forces into the treacherous terrain where his lighter, more mobile troops held the advantage. But the Qin walls remained silent. The only answer Xiang Yan received was the smoke of cooking fires rising lazily into the sky. Inside the Qin camp, a strange transformation was taking place. Wang Jian was not just waiting, he was healing his army. He walked among the tents, not as a distant commander, but as a grandfather figure, checking the soldiers' rice bowls to ensure they were full. He ordered them to bathe, to rest, and to organize stone-throwing contests and jumping games to keep their spirits high. He understood a fundamental truth about warfare that younger generals missed. His men were terrified. They had seen their comrades butchered under Li Xin the year before. Wang Jian needed to rebuild their nerves, feeding them and letting them relax until their fear turned into a surplus of energy. As the weeks turned into months, the dynamic of the war shifted. The Chu army, initially burning with the patriotic fury to defend their homeland, began to lose its edge. Maintaining a massive standing army in the field is a logistical nightmare. and idleness is a poison to discipline. The Chu soldiers, seeing the Qin refuse battle day after day, began to believe the rumors that Wang Jian was too old and too cowardly to fight. The tension of the standoff was replaced by a dangerous complacency. They believed the invasion had stalled. They were wrong. Wang Jian was not stalling. He was sharpening the blade, waiting for the exact moment the enemy lowered their shield. After a full year of staring at the silent Qin walls, Xiangyan blinked first, convinced that the old general had no intention of fighting, and struggling to maintain supply lines for his vast host in the static positions. The Chu commander made a fatal calculation. He ordered his army to strike camp and move eastward, intending to redeploy to a more sustainable location. It was a logical, logistical decision, but it relied on the single assumption that the Qin army was paralyzed by fear. They were not paralyzed. They were a coiled spring. The moment the Chu battalions turned their backs, breaking their defensive squares to begin the march, Wang Jian unleashed the apocalypse. The signal flags snapped in the wind, and the gates of the Qin fortifications threw open. 600,000 men, rested, fed to the brim, and bursting with pent-up aggression, poured out like a landslide. The terrain now became the enemy of the south. Caught on the open ground between their camps, burdened with baggage trains and facing away from the attackers, the Chu forces could not wheel around to form battle lines. The Qin heavy infantry, the finest shock troops of the era, slammed into the disorganized Chu rear with the force of a collapsing mountain. It was not a battle. It was a liquidation. The discipline of the Chu army, already eroded by months of boredom, shattered instantly under the physical impact. Panic spread faster than the Qin chariots could ride. In the chaotic stampede, the sheer size of the Chu army became a liability, as terrified soldiers trampled their own comrades in a desperate attempt to outrun the wall of black armor closing in behind them. The initial collision was only the beginning of the end. Wang Jian knew that a wounded beast is the most dangerous, so he did not let up. The Qin army pursued the broken remnants of the Chu forces relentlessly, pushing them deep into the south, crossing the Huai River, the spiritual heartland of the Chu people. In 223 BC, the Qin forces stormed the capital of Shochun, capturing King Fuchu and effectively decapitating the state. But one man refused to kneel. Xiangyan, cut off and surrounded, made one final, desperate gamble. He retreated further east, declaring Lord Changping the very man who had betrayed Li Xin. As the new king of Chu, it was a defiant act of hope in a hopeless situation. But the tide of history was irresistible. The Qin legions closed the net around the last pockets of resistance, realizing that the sky had truly fallen, and refusing the indignity of capture, Xiangyan drew his sword. In his final moments, he did not just end his life. He birthed a legend. His suicide was the tragic punctuation mark to centuries of independence. Yet, as the old general fell, a prophecy began to whisper through the conquered lands. Though Chu had but 3 clans left, the one who destroyed Qin would be Chu. It was a chilling promise that would be kept 17 years later by his own grandson, the terrifying Shang Yu. With the death of Xiangyan, the spine of the south was finally broken. The vast territories of Chu, a distinct civilization that had existed for 800 years, were absorbed into the growing map of the Qian Empire. 2 years later, in 221 BC, the last remaining state of Qi would surrender without a fight, terrorized by the fate of Chu. King Zheng officially declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. As for Wang Jian, he performed perhaps his greatest miracle. He survived his own success. Having delivered the world to his master, the old general quietly handed back his command and retired to the estates he had so greedily demanded, dying peacefully in his bed. A rarity for those who served the paranoid emperor. However, the ghost of the Battle of Chu would not rest. The prophecy whispered at Xiang Yan's death proved to be terrifyingly accurate. The brutality of the conquest planted a seed of hatred in the south that the legalist laws of Qin could not crush. 17 years later, as the Qin Empire collapsed into chaos, it was Xiang Yan's own grandson, the warlord Xiang Yu, who would march into the Qin capital of Xianyang. He would butcher the royal family, burn the palaces to the ground, and extinguish the bloodline of the first emperor, fulfilling the vow that the destroyer of Qin would indeed be Chu.